Hi, welcome to the afternoon session. I'm Narasimha Rao. I'm a faculty at the Yale School of the Environment. I work on energy systems in transition, and I'm very, very excited to have this opportunity to moderate this panel today. Quick story before I get into the panel. A few years ago, I went for a vacation to Iceland, of all places, during the summer. And you fly in at night, and it looks like a moonscape. You land, go to the hotel room. I woke up in the morning, and I wanted to brush my teeth. I turned on the tap and the warm water, and I took a bit of water in my mouth, and I gagged. And I had this strong smell and taste of sulfur. And then I said, oh my God, yeah, I'm in Iceland, of course. All the energy is geothermal. The hot water, space conditioning, power generation is geothermal. A lot of people don't know that the US actually has a significant amount of geothermal-based power generation. I believe in absolute terms, the highest in the world of any country. And it's not just geothermal for power generation, but there's also low-temperature geothermal for heat pumps using higher levels of reservoirs to be able to more efficiently use heat pumps. So we have experts for both these types of geothermal technologies here today. And so I want to take the opportunity to introduce them first. We have Jenna Hill, who works as a geoscientist and liaison at the Clean Energy Task Force, a fact-based environmental NGO focusing on catalyzing the development of pragmatic solutions to climate change. At CATF, she's focused on identifying and addressing technology and policy gaps for next-generation geothermal energy, with a focus on super hot rock energy, which I'm very excited to hear about. The last couple of years, Jenna led the geothermal team's federal policy and implementation initiatives. Prior to CATF, Jenna was responsible for conducting environmental regulation research and environmental modeling in the US and in India. Her educational background includes a master's degree in geothermal science from the University of Iceland, in fact, and a bachelor's degree in energy systems law and geology. So welcome, Jenna. Brian, in the middle, Brian Gaulzetti, is a principal geothermal energy consultant at Dandelion Energy, where he leads the direct-to-consumer division for geothermal heat pump installations across New England. Brian has been instrumental in helping homeowners transition from traditional combustion-based heating to renewable geothermal energy. His professional background includes extensive experience in environmental remediation, where he provided regulatory guidance and conducted environmental risk assessments and environmental cleanup. And he, as in his own words, he went from cleaning up oil spills to helping prevent the need for oil in the first place. And Brian has a bachelor's degree in environmental geoscience. Welcome, Brian. And finally, Matt Mailloux, is that how you say it? A senior program manager at ClearPath, a nonprofit with the mission to accelerate American innovation to reduce global energy emissions through collaborations with public and private sector stakeholders on innovations in geothermal, nuclear, and other technologies. He leads ClearPath's geothermal energy, tax policy, and DOE modernization efforts. He works across ClearPath's suite of technology areas to shape legislative and regulatory efforts, including new policy development and responding to administrative proposals. Matthew has a bachelor's in finance and marketing, and actually has taken the Yale School of Environment certificate in financing and deploying clean energy. So great, I'm very happy to have all of you. I thought we could start by having each one of you maybe spend 5 minutes or so giving us an overview of what you do, what you're excited about, and then I have a round of questions, 2 or 3 questions I'd like to ask of all of you, and then I'll turn it over to the audience to ask questions. So maybe we can start with Jenna, and then Matt, and then Brian.
Sure, that sounds good. Should I go up there? Or?
It's up to you. If you'd like to speak from here, that's fine too.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. So great to see you all. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Jenna Hill. I work for Clean Air Task Force. We are a technology-forward NGO focused on catalyzing solutions to climate change. And when we think about geothermal as a resource, the piece that we focus on is the potential for geothermal to contribute to decarbonization of the power sector in the US and on a global scale. So geothermal is a really exciting place to be right now, and it's an exciting resource to think about because the total amount of heat in the earth is nearly limitless, and the and it's continually regenerating, whether or not we use it for a resource, for power production, for decarbonization. So when we think about geothermal power production, we can think about it in terms of conventional geothermal power production or next generation geothermal power production. So just kind of to level set on how power production works for conventional systems, what exists today largely, what's existed for the past kind of 100 years is the production of hot, naturally occurring groundwater that's shallow to the surface, that sits in porous rock, production of that to spin a turbine to generate power. And next generation geothermal, so when you hear the DOE talk about next generation geothermal power production, what they're talking about is either enhanced geothermal systems or advanced geothermal systems. So enhanced geothermal systems, EGS, works by circulating groundwater through fractured systems to generate hot water, steam, to then produce power. And then when you're talking about advanced geothermal systems, AGS, also referred to as closed loop systems, we're talking about circulation of water through continuous boreholes to then generate power. So these are the technologies that are really moving the needle now, because it answers that question of scalability. So now we're not relying on locations that have rare pockets of hot water. We're not relying on locations just like Iceland or Hawaii, but it really opens up this scalability aspect, particularly when paired with advancements in deep drilling. So that's why technology advancements can really help us kind of move the needle, help us access this vast resource. Taking it one step further, what CATF spends a lot of our time thinking about is these next generation systems, applying them to high temperature reservoirs. So modeling out of Japan Beyond Brittle project in Japan, and modeling out of Iceland Deep Drilling project tells us that there may be a step change in energy density when you go into 400 degrees Celsius plus conditions. And so that's when you see AGS and EGS in these 400 degrees Celsius conditions, that's what we refer to as super hot rock energy. But the umbrella of geothermal power innovation and next generation geothermal power includes EGS, closed loop systems, and this kind of idea of super hot systems. So what it takes in terms of filling technology gaps and policy gaps to really enable the potential of these technologies. I'm excited to discuss that today, but yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Matt Mailloux with ClearPath. And as was mentioned, our mission is to accelerate American innovation to reduce global energy emissions. And what that means essentially is that we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we support early stage innovation, whether it be at the Department of Energy or in the private sector, and ultimately finding ways to bring down costs to have these new technologies reach commercial potential and then export those technologies all around the world. And we work with federal policymakers, primarily Republicans, on how to move these technologies from the lab to the market. And I think it's amazing that we filled an entire room with people that are interested in geothermal, because I don't know that 5 years ago we would have been able to do that. And the technology is having a true moment, right? We found bipartisan interest in Congress in removing roadblocks, providing that early stage financing. And I think it's a testament to where the technology is going. As Jenna mentioned, the new systems, the next generation of geothermal, unlocks far more opportunities to develop these resources. Geothermal has been around for a long time. It's a very versatile resource, right? It can heat your home. We can use it for power. We can use it to decarbonize heavy industry. But for a long time, we were limited to natural expressions that had all the right characteristics. We're now using technology that's been adapted and pioneered by the oil and gas industry. We can engineer the right conditions in a much wider set of locations, dramatically improving the economics of these projects and the potential resource availability, not just in a few isolated areas in the West, but really all across the US and all across the world. And when we think about why geothermal is needed, it's one of very few solutions that meet the needs of clean, firm power, right? So whether it's long-duration battery storage or advanced nuclear or advanced geothermal, companies are looking for ways to meet their energy demands in a reliable way with a net zero footprint. That's why you've seen companies like Google partner with Vervo Energy using what they've called a clean transition tariff to finance these first-of-a-kind projects, where Google's willing to pay a bit of a price premium today to make sure they have that energy available to power their data centers, and doing so in a way that keeps the average ratepayer without any sort of rate impacts. So excited to talk a lot more about these topics today, and really looking forward to the conversation.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian. Thanks. Appreciate that. Awesome. And I'm with Dandelion Geothermal. We are a residential heat pump company. And I was laughing with Jenna. My boreholes are much smaller than her boreholes. I thought I'd just talk quick on, just make sure everyone's on the same page of like how a heat pump works in a residential setting. You did a great job explaining how we're doing the super hot rocks, which is a really fun word to say. In a residential setting, basically what we're doing is we're replacing your furnace and your air conditioner with a heat pump. And then that heat pump is tied to a ground loop that goes usually about up to 600 feet down. The one at my house is 341 feet. And what we do is make a hole and put a pipe in the ground. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about closed loop ground loops, by the way. There's other types, but almost everyone uses a closed loop ground loops. So the pipe goes down, and it's circulating water that collects not 400 degree earth temperature, but just about 50 degrees. And that's all we really need to collect heat in the wintertime. Collect heat, bring that water back to the heat pump in your basement, concentrate it through a compression cycle, which is the same basic compression cycle that your current air conditioner and heater work in your car. And then we're going to blow about 100 degree air through your vents. So again, we're taking energy that already exists, just like Jenna talked about, and concentrate it and then blow it into your house. We don't have to light anything on fire, which is awesome. You don't need a chimney anymore. It really is 100% clean, no combustion-based heating solution for your house. And then on the flip side, it also does cooling. So it really does your whole entire HVAC setup for your house. And it does that by just flipping in reverse. And now we dump the heat from your house back down into the ground, again, through that same ground loop as it goes through. So what Dandelion does is we are the biggest residential geothermal installer in the country. And I say that with pretty good confidence because that's part of the problem with geothermal residential is right now it's small, right? The only people that do it are like little small mom and pop shops, and they can't do that many homes, right? They might do one a month. Or it's a small section of a larger company, and again, it's like, oh yeah, we sort of do that, but mostly we just sell air conditioners. So Dandelion is one of the first companies to ever try to do this at scale. It's all we do, and all we're focused on is residential geothermal. And where we see the future of that is right now we're doing direct, homeowner installations, but we are recently two new, avenues we've started where we developed our own heat pump because as we'll talk about later, heat pumps are challenging to install and retrofit homes, homes that already have all of their infrastructure in place, the ductwork or, how it's all set up. It's hard to change that. So we've developed a heat pump that is much more adaptable to existing homes. So we're starting to sell that on a national stage so that we can connect with existing suppliers or existing installers in Kansas, in Colorado, in California, and just sell them our heat pump to spread it that way. And then the other avenue that we see is a really easy way to get geothermal into the most homes is do new homes. So we're connecting with building developers that are doing whole neighborhoods. We're working on one in Colorado, which is really exciting. They're building 2,500 homes, so like almost a town, right? Like a whole community. And it's going to be all geothermal, every single house on geothermal. Someone else is putting solar panels on the roof. They're not even going to bring a gas line to the community. It's going to be 100% electric. Like that's so exciting, and that's what we really see the future as well with geothermal as it goes. So, yeah, I think that's what we got there. Thanks, guys.
Super, thanks. So eventually, I'm hoping by the end of this session, we'll all get a better understanding of from your perspective as experts, what's the potential for this in an ideal world, right? And we're going to hopefully build up to that. I want to start with technical challenges, because there's various, like in power generation, some aspects you can borrow from the oil and gas industry, which is long, mature experience with drilling, but there's some new aspects to it as well. So I'm just thinking, and in the case of heat pumps, I'm not sure, are there technical challenges really? Is this more a question of just, market acceptance and scale? And I'm just thinking of this technology maturity curve, from one extreme you have solar photovoltaic, a very mature market. On the other extreme, you have very hard to abate sectors, aviation, cement industry. Where do you see geothermal in that spectrum, and where are the key bottlenecks technically? And where do we need to put an effort in R&D to really, really push forward towards markets? So maybe first on the power generation side, and then, are there any on the heat pump side as well? So who'd like to, Jenna? Jenna, you're the geoscientist. Maybe you want to go first.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I love this question because something that we're doing, that CATF is doing right now, is we're pulling together a series of technology leaders globally to try to answer this question. Where do we need to fill the gaps for geothermal, whether it's for next generation geothermal, whether it's drilling, whether it's reservoir creation, whether it's well construction, power production. And what we've really found throughout the studies we've commissioned and through the convenings we've had with global research groups is that really what this is about is co-opting technologies that already exist, but demonstrating them end to end is really the need. So the place that the technology is at when we're talking about EGS and closed loop systems is the need to have proper funding so that startups can go out into the field and demonstrate that they can produce power end to end. And then when we think about super hot technologies, it's about having capacity to test in the field and test in the laboratory space and iterate on learnings in the laboratory space and learnings in the field so they can communicate and bring down costs and bring down technology risk. And we can go into more detail. I think what we've seen from demonstration projects so far in the next generation space is when you get to higher temperatures, there's a lot of times some casing failures that have to do with high temperature operation of casing metals at high temperatures and high temperature swings. So the ability to test materials in the field and iterate into laboratory space is something that is needed a bit for the super hot side of things, but for the EGS and AGS systems side of things, it's really just about demonstrating end-to-end continual testing to bring down costs. But really, these are engineering iterations that just need to be demonstrated and tested. Because this is about co-opting technologies that have existed in oil and gas for a while.
No, Jenna, I couldn't agree more, right? Learning by doing is the single best way to bring down costs and bring technologies closer to market. And when it comes to geothermal, right, DOE has had a lot of recent success with the Forge project out in Utah, which is a research lab scale demonstration on advanced drilling technologies. Similarly, you've seen recent results from Fervo Energy where they've been able to reduce drilling times by 70% from their first project to their second deployment. And when we think about learning by doing, right, in some ways it means you make fewer mistakes. In some ways it means you're able to go faster. But the only way you can do that is by unlocking capital. And that's where geothermal has had sort of the most challenging part, is that for a solar project, you can go to a financer and they'll see that project as bankable because we've built thousands of solar projects. But we haven't built thousands of geothermal projects yet. And that's where we see the role of early stage government research and development, partnerships with the Department of Energy, financing from the Loan Programs Office at low costs of capital levels that can really catapult this technology forward and give the operators the opportunity to prove that they can learn by doing.
Ryan, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll take that. So the technological challenges that a residential heat pump has is really clear if you guys just think about your own home. How many people have radiators in their house? I can't do anything for you. I say I can't. Technically, someone could, but Dandelion and almost every other heat pump installer really focuses on ductwork because that's the best heat pumps use ductwork. But if your home doesn't have ductwork, then we really don't have anything that is commercially like economically viable yet to do that. So where the technology can come is develop a heat pump that can achieve the hot enough water temperatures to roll through those radiators that you have on existing homes such that you won't be chilly in January, right? Because if you're chilly in January, the technology didn't work. So that is going to be the next level of innovation that we go through. Dandelion, I said that we developed our own heat pump. We did that because of the challenges of even ductwork homes, right? Most ductwork, if it was installed 60 years ago, it's leaky, it's small, it's not in the right spot, or it's not insulated. So we had to develop a heat pump that can increase the air temperature compared to everything else on the market to solve the airflow issue. Then you have the electrical issue, right? Heat pumps use more electricity than a furnace does. Oops, sorry. So if your main panel, right, the main service coming into your house is only 200 amps or my house is 100 amps, I'm out of luck until we can invent a new heat pump that doesn't use as much electricity at initial startup so that you can not blow people's electrical panels or require them to spend an extra $10,000 to upgrade their main panel. So that's where the technology is going to come from. Our heat pump has addressed some of those. So I think we're good with most ducted homes, but again, I still can't help radiators yet until there's enough money invested into just R&D. And I won't say we got lucky, but we did have a lot of investors, like Bill Gates gave us a bunch of money and we put that all into inventing a new heat pump. But we're a big enough company to do that again, and we're the only company out there doing it, right? Because the whole industry needs to get big enough that they can start investing all of those dollars into innovations and catch up to where solar is right now, for example.
Well, it sounds like from all your comments that we don't have fundamental technological challenges. It's about creating the incentives to put them together, put existing technologies together, create a whole bunch of demonstration projects, market creation in the case of power generation. And in the case of heat pumps, it's a technical challenge for homes, but not technological. And actually, as a matter of fact, in Europe, it's exactly the reverse, right? I mean, most homes have baseboard radiators or some form of water circulation, and their hydronic heat pumps are the norm. It's completely reversed, which is interesting. It's about market creation. So talking about market creation. So on the power generation side, we have a bunch of incentives that have been put in place recently. We have the Watershed Inflation Reduction Act. We have production and investment tax credits. You said they have some potential loan programs with the DOE. How good are these? And how much do they need to increase? I mean, if you have your realistic opinion on, we really need to beef up these incentives so we can have order of magnitude more demonstration projects. What's going to really move the needle in terms of market creation from the policy incentive perspective? And, Brian, with heat pumps, you got these tax credits. You've got some rebates potential for low-income housing. States are offering incentives as well. So what's your read in terms of the policy landscape? How good are these? Do you foresee you're going to have a lot of penetration due to these incentives? We're not seeing a lot in the last couple of years. So how much do we need to increase those? Is that going to really move the needle in terms of accelerating the adoption of heat pumps? So, shall we go in reverse this time and do heat pumps first?
Sure. So with heat pumps, homeowners are eligible usually for a state rebate. New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts have really good ones comparatively. Rhode Island doesn't have any. So there's not a lot of geothermal installers in Rhode Island, right? Like that alone is a market, error as we go through. I think the biggest thing with the financial incentives that the government offers, the state offers, the federal government offers, is actually less so the amount, because it's harder to argue to get more, but the timing of it seems like an easier fix. Because right now, if you get a geothermal heat pump in your house, it's $50,000 or so, right? The rebate from the state of Connecticut might be up to $15,000, but you don't get that money until after the project's done. So that means you, as homeowner, have to come up with $15,000 and then wait for Hartford to write that check. Then the federal tax credit is on your taxes, which you can't file until the following January, April. So you might be waiting. I mean, if you're installed in January, you might be waiting 18 months to get that money. Why can't it be an upfront rebate? Why can't it be a rebate that Dandelion, Energy, which is a multi-million-dollar company, why can't we take it for you so then we can just pass that right on to you? Right now, the IRS tax code doesn't allow third-party ownership of geothermal heat pumps, so we can't let you lease a geothermal heat pump from us or lease the ground loop from us, because then nobody gets the tax credit. And when all of a sudden something's 30% more expensive, again, it just doesn't work, right? So the timing of the funds, I think, is if not more important, really important aspect of how we start paying for these projects as a society as it goes forward.
That's important. Thank you. Yeah. Matt, do you want to go next?
Sure. And on the power generation side, I think the biggest demand creation has been a result of just energy demand growth nationwide. For 2 decades, we've had more or less flat load growth. And now with AI, data centers, electrification, you're seeing far more demand for people to access power from the grid, right? That's part of like a manufacturing renaissance that we've seen in this country. That's part of those first couple demand drivers that I mentioned. And that's why you see companies with the ability and willingness to pay for clean, firm power are looking to geothermal. The tax credits are great as well. 45Y and 48E, the new tax credits that were passed in the Inflation Reduction Act, offer technology-neutral incentives for any form of clean power generation. So geothermal will certainly qualify. But what's missing, I would say, is there's not a specific incentive for clean, firm power generation. Solar would get the same percentage ITC as geothermal, and those offer very different grid benefits. And that's, in part, the tax code is good at collecting revenue, and sometimes when you try to pass, energy or climate policy through the tax code, it doesn't always work as efficiently as you otherwise might expect. The last thing I would say on demand creation, you've also seen state level efforts from states like California, where they have a 1 gigawatt procurement requirement that their Public Utility Commission passed. And that has driven a lot of interest to projects that either can be located in California or tie into their grid. But no, I think the demand creation side, we're going to need so much more power in this country. And for a long time, it's been, should we build clean or clean up fossil? And now it's just a matter of we need to build more of everything.
Actually, if I can jump on that, key to a good thought that I had on sense of geothermal in electrical demand and the timing of that all. Again, I would go back to timing, I guess. But peak electrical demand on a grid is, July 4th weekend when everyone's cranking their AC, because we're still doing the same amount of everything else, but now we're adding air conditioning, right? With geothermal, it flips the peak energy demand, because now a geothermal heat pump is twice as efficient as every other air conditioner, so you're using less electricity in the summertime. And yes, you are using more electricity in the wintertime, but that's not when everyone else is cranking their AC, right? So it flips the demand, or that peak demand, which is what electrical grids have to be built to support. So when we go to Eversource and say, hey, you should up the incentive for geothermal heat pumps, that's the carrot that we give them, is that if more people are doing geothermal heat pumps in their house, you don't have to build as big of an infrastructure anymore. You don't have to do that big repair line to the thing, because your peak demand, which is really what they build their infrastructure for, is reduced, when we get everyone on that. So again, the timing of that demand generation is also important too.
That's really interesting. What I'll add to the IRA piece of things is I completely agree with Matt that the ITC and PCC are helpful, but a clean firm adder to that could be useful in valuing the value of firm power. And when we think about innovation, geothermal innovation specifically, there are a few other kind of policy pieces that also could make sense in addition to something like a tax credit. So other ways that the government can play a role in technology and clean energy technology innovation could be three more ways. I think facilitating collaboration between stakeholders that may not otherwise collaborate on innovation. Developing best practices for new technologies, and reducing financial risk for those first-of-a-kind technologies is also pretty essential. So when we think about reducing financial risk for first-of-a-kind technologies, what you could think about is a cost share system for new kind of drilling technologies, because the upfront cost of drilling is a real barrier for financing for geothermal projects. There have also been proposals for like a next generation geothermal collaboration that stood up by the DOE. That could a public-private collaboration could be really useful in technology innovations. So facilitating communication, facilitating best practices, facilitating financial risk reductions at the start of projects is in addition to tax incentives. It's maybe what we think about, maybe even more when we're thinking about newer technologies and first-of-a-kind technologies.
That's great. So it's not just financial incentives that we need, but going back to the financial incentives, it seems in both cases you're talking about some utility scale benefits that you're not able to capture, where there are aspects of the operations of these geothermal technologies that differentiate them from other renewables, supporting the grid. How can we get money for that? And, maybe getting capacity credit in wholesale markets for power generation based on geothermal. In the case of heat pumps, I can imagine maybe demand-side programs where you can, you have programs to shave peaks, could be potential instruments as well.
Yeah, there's a new thing in Massachusetts. So all National Grid customers with heat pumps, in the wintertime, they will have a reduced electrical cost, just to, again, further encourage what we're trying to do.
Great. So one more round of questions. I was interested in getting down to the ground level. So we have with renewables, but even just solar PV, we have the equivalent of the entire installed electric base of the U.S. in terms of projects in the pipeline that are waiting for interconnections. You also have issues around the world with solar PV's land siting, where you have the opposite problem, where there's land grabbing happening to secure sites that's having negative effects on people. So I'm just wondering, on the ground, in terms of project development, in terms of you're dealing with digging underground, regulatory risk, or NIMBY issues, with project development specifically, what are the hurdles over there that you're going to encounter, especially as you have, now that you said the geography is opened up much wider, right? And in the case of homes, I've been studying this a little bit in terms of household barriers. You got to catch households at the right time when their heating equipment is ready to be replaced too. If they just bought a gas furnace. So I'm just thinking in terms of actual on-the-ground experience, in terms of retrofitting homes or people's willingness. From your experience with Dandelion, what do you think are the main barriers with the project development aspect of it? Maybe we start this time with Jenna and Matt, and either one of you.
I'm happy to start, and then I'm happy to pass it to you, Jenna. I would say, from a regulatory risk perspective, geothermal, at least the projects we're seeing today, are largely located on federal land. And with that comes a set of federal requirements, whether it be land leasing or environmental review or whatnot. And 20 years ago, as a country, we decided to give oil and gas an expedited permitting timeline for drilling on federal land in 2005. Geothermal was left out of that provision. So for 20 years, geothermals had to clear higher hurdles to develop projects. Just last month, the U.S. House of Representatives passed with broad bipartisan support legislation that, if enacted, would extend that same treatment to geothermal. You mentioned sort of, as we open the map, though, like what does the future look like? Right now, a lot of the projects we see are very remote, right? We're looking at Beaver County, Utah, where Fervo is located, or Winnemucca, Nevada. Go look those up on a map. There isn't a whole lot there. If we start to try to expand geothermal into the east, you're going to be closer to population center, and there's going to need to be a broader conversation around community acceptance and some of the trade-offs that geothermal has compared to other forms of renewables. So I think it's safe to say every single energy source has some sort of trade-off. The question is, how close to home is it, and how much does it affect the local community? But I think where we're getting to with those is that if we can prove success and develop strong, rigorous procedures and policies, a lot of what Jenna was mentioning earlier, that address the drilling risk and address community acceptance and making sure that those benefits are well understood, those are manageable at this point. And I think there's a lot of opportunity still to go.
So permitting delays is certainly a challenge for siting geothermal projects. And Matt mentioned new legislation, but one thing that we also think about CATF is implementation and how to empower agencies to do what they're already supposed to be doing. So one piece of that is ensuring that there's adequate staffing at field offices that they're responsible for permitting. So we're not really interested in just having an office that's pushing through projects. In the same way, we're not interested in the challenge in the same way that it would be a bad thing if nothing were permitted. So having more staffing for say BLM field offices, so that these reviews can be responsible but also timely, is also something that could help move the needle for geothermal permitting. Similar to that, even something as simple as developing training modules that are up to date with new geothermal technologies, so that folks working at permitting offices feel comfortable and empowered to make decisions, is another thing that could be useful for siting for geothermal.
The permitting challenges we see in the residential setting is that the permits are regulated by the town, and each individual little tiny town in New England has their own individual rules for some reason, which can be incredibly challenging, again, if you're trying to scale an industry, and which is why, again, we're the only company that has even tried. Even state to state, like we have some drillers that can only work in Connecticut for no apparent reason, that they can't work in Massachusetts. Like, it's the same rock. Like, I took a geology class. Like, we know how to do this. So if we can find ways to reduce what is seemingly rules that have just been on the books, right? Like, why is it I have to be 100 feet away from a drinking water well in this town, but I can be 25 feet away in the next town? There's no apparent rhyme or reason to it, besides the fact that when they wrote the laws, they didn't know what geothermal was, so they just treated every well as a drinking water well. And it's just frustrating to try to scale something when it's so different every single town. And again, every single state. We're trying to move into a new state in the next couple weeks or so, but we can't get a driller's license. Again, we've drilled 2,000 homes now. Like, we know what we're doing, but we can't get a driller's license until XYZ or whatever it might be. So if we can make the permitting just easier for the types of industry that we're trying to encourage, that seems like what the government can do. They're already giving us thousands of dollars per project. Just make it easier as well as it goes.
It's always government that's the problem, isn't it? You just have to wait till November and see what happens. Well, we have some time for questions from all of you. So, yes, please. You start, please.
Love what Dandelion's doing, but my question's about enhanced geothermal. Sure. Everyone seems to recognize that enhanced geothermal is the most promising technology going forward. This presentation is even called Enhancing Geothermal. But whenever anybody talks about enhanced geothermal, all they talk about is Fervo Energy. My concern is that Fervo has got this technology lead with their $240 million from Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Is there anybody else coming close, or is Fervo the whole industry right now?
I would say Fervo is the furthest ahead, right? There's definitely a wide array of technologies in this space, whether that be Ever, which has a closed loop system. They're doing a pilot project in Germany. They're working with the Defense Innovation Unit. Okay, so maybe some mixed reactions there.
It's different.
It is different, right? But like XGS, Greenfire Energy, like there's a number of companies in this space. I think there are 7 projects that the Defense Innovation Unit, which is essentially geothermal wells on Air Force bases, to prove the technology and offer those resiliency benefits to those bases. So it's not just Fervo, and I think Fervo is leading from the front, given that they've been able to demonstrate success from their pilot project to their next ones. And hopefully that means we have a bunch of fast followers into this space. And then Fervo can be the first one out of the gate, but then unlock capital for everyone else. I think that's where the biggest opportunity is.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have 2 questions. The first one is, can heat pump technology be done anywhere in the U.S.? And the second is there an advantage to areas of the world that have greater geothermal potential? Like, for example, in Central America, where you have a lot of volcanic rock, how would that compare? In other words, using that kind of volcanic rock, would that be an advantage?
Yeah, great question. So the answer to the first question is yes. Geothermal heat pumps can be done anywhere in the world because all we're looking for is a steady source of heat. In Connecticut, the ground temperature is about 53 degrees or so. In Canada, it's 41. But it doesn't matter what the temperature is as long as it stays the same.
But even tropical areas?
Yep. So tropical areas, the ground temperature for the first 600 feet or so is the average air temperature for every day of the year for the last 10,000 years. So if you add up all your January days, add up all your July days, it averages out in Connecticut to 53 degrees. So that's why our ground temperature is 53 degrees. So that's your fun fact of the day if you wanted one. But in the tropics, right, if we go down to Panama and we put a geothermal heat pump down, it would work, but also they don't really need heat down there. It would work good for cooling, but they don't need a lot of cooling either, right? So geothermal works best when you're using it in an extreme temperature, whether it's hot or cold, because that's when you're using the most energy to heat or cool your house. New York, New England, Connecticut are great because we do have really cold winters and really hot summers, so you get both of best of both worlds for geothermal. So as for whether it helps more if you're next to a volcano, yeah, there's more energy, but again, that's probably a better question for these guys than me. I'm 500 feet down. Like it's a pretty minor blip on how deep we go in the grand scheme of things, right? Like you're miles down, I'm 500 feet down. So yeah.
So any comment on other countries where you have a lot of, I know Kenya is one, there are many other countries that have a lot of geothermal potential, but any insights on that? That's fine. That was a hand, yeah, go ahead.
So thank you so much for coming here and being able to speak with us. I'd say my question is, I know you mentioned, Matt, about how geothermal projects in the American West are located in places with low population, not much going on there. I guess with the advent of these projects over the next decade or so, do you see a future where rural economies in those regions can be revitalized due to their presence specifically?
So is there potential to revitalize rural economies where you might cite geothermal projects in the future?
It's a good question. I would say generally yes, right? When you think about the types of jobs that are created when you have a geothermal project, right? It's very similar to oil and gas workforce, right? You need people to drill wells, operate, maintain them, and then run a power plant once it's up and running. So I definitely think from a job creation standpoint, like you have a lot of interest there. But yeah, I think it'd be part of a broader solution, right? The same way that rural towns, whether they've had a coal mine or a coal plant for 100 years, right? Maybe this is part of that new solution. We've seen the advanced nuclear industry try to make that case as well, especially in southwestern Wyoming with Kemmer, the Terra Project power plant. So I think certainly opportunity, and I wouldn't want to overstate the benefits of a power plant. I don't know, Jenna, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, just to add, I don't know if any of you got the chance to read the DOE's liftoff report on next generation geothermal, but it came out with some really helpful stats to think about this idea of workforce transition. I know it's kind of adding on to this question. It's not a direct answer to this, but I think it's useful to think about one benefit to geothermal is this workforce piece and its ability to pivot and scale quite quickly compared to some brand new technology, because it's using a lot of the same skill sets, the same expertise that already exist in the energy workforce today. So what the DOE found was that there are 300,000 jobs in the U.S. that are directly applicable to geothermal, next generation geothermal power generation, whether this is subsurface engineers, folks working at power plants, et cetera. But this job transition piece is really key, especially when we're talking about climate, where the timeline and having a timeline to scaling up clean power is incredibly important. So,
a lot of hands. Yes.
Could you please tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of the different new technologies, and if some or one is better for a certain application or condition?
Yeah, I think so. I encourage you guys to add to this. Speaking specifically about the three kind of technologies that I introduced earlier. So closed loop systems, there are a lot less unknowns. Kind of, you're creating a borehole, a continuous borehole. You know exactly, what that looks like. There's no kind of, there's a lot less effort into creating a reservoir or enhancing a reservoir than an EGS system. There are some technical difficulties with holding open reservoirs for a long period of time when you're talking about fractured systems. So there are some different technical challenges there. And then, of course, when you scale up to higher temperature applications, there are just a lot more questions around, how do you keep open reservoirs? How do you make sure wells are able to withstand a 25-year lifetime? And when you're talking about closed loop systems, there's less ability to there's less risk of scaling as well. So scaling is an issue you see when there's a lot of precipitation of natural minerals in a hydrothermal system. You won't see that really at all with a closed loop system, and it's limited what you'd see in an EGS system. But there are good things about EGS where you're having direct contact water with the rock. So of course there's a lot more surface area for the water to interact with. So there are a lot of pros and cons, we'd say. But I think that's why it's great that there are a few different technology options that are being pursued right now.
What's a life expectancy? Talk about the pros and cons. A life expectancy of an open well versus closed well, and then failure rate, open well, closed well.
Yeah. So the wells themselves are really engineered the same way when you're talking about production and injection wells. But life expectancy across the spectrum of geothermal, the ideal is a 25-year lifetime if you're planning out a power plant. And I'm not quite sure what the difference is between closed loop and EGS system in terms of long-term lifetime. And maybe Matt has some numbers here, I'm not sure. But what I will say is this comes back to the need for demonstrations and long-term demonstrations to really get the answers to a question like that. Because I think it's obviously a really important question for modeling a power plant of either of the systems.
There's some hands on this side. Let's go. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for your insights. My question is, and I'd love to hear your comments on the viability of community geothermal, whether it's a full multifamily building or perhaps at a town level. And if so, and if it's assuming it's a yes, why are we not shifting the conversation from who's funding geothermal from VCs to perhaps pension funds, state and city retirement systems?
Yeah, it is a great potential option, like networked geothermal. So what that would be is you, instead of one house, one well, you drill 20 wells, and then you have 20 houses connect to that overall ground loop system. couple challenges I see on that is, have you ever had 20 neighbors agree on everything? Is one. And because each house at right now, we need to design the geothermal system specifically for every house. Look at their ductwork, look at their electrical. Is the airflow, like, it's just a custom right now, so we haven't cracked the standardization of an install yet, such that you can say, all right, this street is now going to get retrofitted into a network geothermal. Now, if you talk new construction, yeah, you can do because new construction is easy, right? If everyone just build their own house, right? And then we solve everything. Obviously, that's not work. But so that could be a thing. But they are doing that, right? There's a program in Massachusetts where Eversource, the electric company, is running a program, and I think it's 20 homes, and they're going to put all of them on geothermal. It took. I think they tried to find 20 homes that would work for a couple of years, right? It took a while. And then where do you drill the boreholes? Can you put them in the street? That only works if the town's involved. It only works if the state's involved. So there's just a couple more challenges that come from network geothermal. And then, sorry, longer answer, but to go back to our tax credit rebate structure, right now the tax credit is on a personal income taxes. Who gets the personal income tax credit on a network geothermal system? So it's like we have to, it's a great technology, but our current rebate financial structure isn't set up for it yet, I think, without Eversource doing it on their own, for example.
And a quick follow-up to that, what are the risks of having 20 boreholes in one block? One block of houses. What's earth structure?
No, it can be incredibly beneficial, especially if you combine. Really, if the ideal, if you're doing network geothermal, is to combine commercial with residential, because you're in your commercial businesses 9 to 5, and then you go home to your residential on the other side. You don't have to continuously heat all 20 buildings if half of them are commercial, half of them are residential. You can, again, time it so that you're working it together. Or the commercial is putting extra heat because they're manufacturing something, and they can put that extra heat back into the ground loop that then goes down to the residential area down the street. So you can really make it work well. It just takes a lot more coordination and effort for, again, retrofits. New stuff, you can do that much easier. Yeah.
Well, how punctual do we need to be? There's a lot of hands. Should we take a couple more questions?
Yeah, I think so.
Caroline, I'm going to give my student preference.
I have a question for Matt, and maybe Jenna, you can speak to this as well. But you spoke about how a lot of current geothermal plants are located in the American West and remote places, and about the reluctance of people on the East Coast to have those plants situated there. Is there something unique to geothermal plants, either their look or the way they affect environment that have pushed them out there? Because I am just wondering why specifically geothermal is kind of pushed into the remote areas.
And I wish I did have a slide now. But if you look at the map of temperatures at any given depth, the West is much hotter, much shallower. So when we think about drilling east of the Mississippi, those wells will need to be deeper, which is more expensive, takes more time. And then second, there isn't maybe the same degree of workforce, to Jenna's point, located in the eastern states, right? You have a lot of activity for oil and gas, right? In Texas, the Dakotas, out west, in the Utah Basin. Those are sort of the most natural spots. We know those basins relatively well. We know those geographies. We haven't done the same mapping in places like New England. And I think that is maybe just familiarity, first and foremost, and then second would be data, and third would be workforce. And Jen, I don't know if you have anything in addition.
I agree.
Like I said, it's probably a lot better to be next to a geothermal power plant than a oil, gas, coal power plant. So if you got to pick one, that's definitely the one you want to live next to.
I'll take one last question. Manasa.
So we have case studies of geothermal causing earthquakes. How is that impacting the development of these geothermal, and have you come across such actual evidences of that? What are your thoughts on that?
Earthquake risk.
I can answer mine quick. We don't go deep enough to mess with earthquakes at all, so heat pumps are totally fine on that.
I'm going to defer to the scientist on the panel. But no, what I would say is that induced seismicity is a risk with any form of drilling, right? And geothermal is using horizontal wells, and as you approach longer laterals to make projects more efficient, there is risk there. What I would say is that both the Department of Energy, their research center at Forge, and companies have been very willing to address this head on. And there's a difference between earthquakes that you might see subsurface through acoustic monitoring versus earthquakes that you could feel at the surface, much less, large magnitude events. There are protocols that they've put in place to address those. So if they're above a certain threshold, right, they'll pause drilling for some period of time until they have been able to rebaseline. But it is a real consideration when you think of the trade-offs of geothermal, like induced seismicity is one of them. When you think about the trade-offs for other technologies, they look different, but I wouldn't pretend to say that it's not part of the equation, just a matter of how you monitor them and how you mitigate any potential impacts.
Well, I think we need to bring the session to a close. Clearly, you've generated a lot of interest and a lot of people want to continue to ask questions. I can't say I'm more optimistic about geothermal, but I certainly have learned a lot about the barriers and understand the bottlenecks much better. But thank you all very much for coming here and sharing your ideas with us. Appreciate it very much.